Well, hello there, and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Brian Perez is my name, and we are here live on this Wednesday afternoon, the 24th of August, to talk to you guys. Give us a call. What's on your mind? 888-564-6173 is our telephone number, 888-564-6173. And you can also watch us on Facebook and YouTube. You can send us your questions using the messenger feature there. You can also follow us on our new Instagram page. It's Instagram, it's Pastor's Perspective on Instagram is, I guess, what you want to look for. And if you tried calling us yesterday and you couldn't get through, you've got another chance. We're here till 4 p.m. Pacific time today at 888-564-6173. And answering your questions, we've got Bobby Conway and John Hwang. Bobby is live in the studio. He's the pastor of Image Church.
The John Cube is in effect.
This guy. In fact, he could have been such a big help to you yesterday, Bobby.
Yeah.
He was stuck in traffic. He landed at LAX, and then he had to drive over here, which should only be, 45 minutes at the most. And he was stuck in traffic for more than 2 hours. And that just would have been the perfect opportunity for you to have a John Cube on the dashboard of your... Oh, you did? That's why you... Okay.
No, I mean, I needed a John Cube. I could have hit the button and it would have said something like, you can do it. Believe. You are loved. You are great.
Because that's what John does.
That's right.
How are you, John?
Well, I think I need one of those cubes now.
Just for yourself.
Well, I'm kind of blown away because I just went on to the Instagram page for Pastor's Perspective, and man, we were at over 1,500 followers. I think the last time I looked at it, we were just hitting 800.
Yeah.
That's way cool.
Yeah.
It is cool.
Why don't you encourage people to jump on, John?
If you have an Instagram account, you can do it.
That's right. You can do it. That's right.
Very cool. All right, 888-564-6173 is the number to call. And before we go to the phones, let's do one of those Instagram questions. This one was sent in by Joel. Could you please explain the controversy over the Bible verse that supposedly once said, it's the one about the lion and the lamb versus the wolf and the lamb. So there's been this controversy that we've changed the verbiage over the years. You guys know anything about this?
I've not heard that. Have you?
No, I'm.
You're kidding.
I'm just moving my thumb and pointing to Bobby Conway right now. I've never heard that.
Yeah. So, but I mean, sometimes what happens though, you can depending upon certain words, you get in situations as it relates to maybe animals in particular. There can be other words where the translators just aren't exactly sure of the particular animal. And so it could be, if there is some kind of debate around this with somebody, that they might have wondered what best explains this particular animal. But the way that you can end up seeing this is just look at some different translations, compare them, see what they're doing, because sometimes this is just somebody on the internet that just comes up with something, and you don't need to put a lot of stock in it. But it's possible that there's a translation that neither John nor myself have read that puts that in place. But this is nothing to lose sleep on. I mean, at the end of the day, too, when I see stuff like that, let's just say that was the case. What difference would it make?
Right.
That's kind of what you do there. So sometimes what we have to do is ask, what difference does it make? Now, there are situations where you have a comparison of texts where they might use a different word, and the difference is more concerning. So we have to really try our best to wade through the evidence there.
Yeah. So I just looked it up really quick. The verse in question is Isaiah 11:6. Isaiah 11:6 reads, in the NIV, for example, the wolf will live with the lamb. New Living, in that day the wolf and the lamb will live together. English Standard, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb. So it has never said the lion shall lie down with the lamb. So I think what it is maybe that song that we've sung in church for the past 5 to 7 years, the lion and the lamb. Yeah. Maybe people have just gotten confused with that or something. So all that to say, nobody's trying to change anything. It has never said the lion and the lamb, at least not that we know of. So Joel, thank you for sending that in using the Instagram feature. And let's go to the phones now at 888-564-6173. We'll start with Christina in California. What did you want to know, Christina?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm a new listener. I've been listening for the past maybe month.
Nice. How'd you find out about us?
Actually, my mother-in-law said that she would listen to you, and you have great questions and great answers. So I was like, great, let me just listen to that.
Your mom is right, because you're calling in with a great question. Hopefully we'll have a great answer to it.
Right. Okay, so I was in a conversation with a group of people, and they were just talking about vaccines, their choice, whether or not to get vaccines for them and their children. Well, one comment that was made was that the vaccines are against God's will because vaccines are using DNA from aborted babies. And I don't know if that's true or where they got their information, but I don't know what you think about the whole vaccines and if they're against God's will or not.
Now, are you talking about vaccines in general, or I know there was controversy about the COVID vaccine, but are you talking about the COVID vaccine or just vaccines in general?
Vaccines in general. That's what we were talking about was, vaccines in general.
John, do you know anything about this?
Well, in vaccines in general, I mean, there's nothing in Scripture that would mandate against it. In fact, I think that this is one of the things that we can be thankful for, that God has gifted, society with people that are scientists that are able to learn about diseases and to learn about the human body and to be able to discover medicines and preventatives against illnesses and sicknesses. And, I'm thankful that there are polio vaccinations. I'm thankful that there are vaccinations that protect us from different kinds of things like that. And so, I don't, want to. My brain is going.
You can do it.
I can. No, what I want to say is I don't want anyone to think that in Scripture that there is any mandate against it. In fact, I think about like when Isaiah was speaking to King Hezekiah, and he gave him the application of applying medicine onto a boil that he had. And there's Timothy, who had ailments with stomach problems, and Paul subscribed a remedy for that. And so we see that even though we believe that all healing comes from God, that God can use medicine and vaccination in order to move in that process. Now, when it comes to the issue of the vaccination that I think that you're referring to has been stirred up as a controversy regarding the COVID vaccinations, that there are, I believe it was it Moderna?
Yeah, there was the Moderna.
Yeah. So where people had strong protests about that because those kinds of claims about aborted fetuses and babies and things like that have been used. Now, Bobby, I've heard you and Brian get into lengthy discussions, and I think that you were also part of the conversation with Lou Wing on this. So what are some of the things that they've said about that issue?
If I remember correctly, because it's been a while now. It has been a while. That there was one particular vaccine that did use, they would have used some of the lines from the abortions, basically extracting some of the cells from that, from those lines. But I don't recall exactly which one. I would say that in that case, there was options, right? Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't have to have taken that particular vaccine. So some people are just against vaccines in general, and that's a conscious thing. If their conscience is against it, that's fine. But then those that are okay taking vaccines, I think that it's important for us to know what's being put into our body. Yeah. And if it does have any elements whatsoever from an abortion, then that should be a caution for us. Now, just for an ethical thought experiment, let's just, for the sake of imagination, imagine if you were ever in a situation where there was only one particular vaccine, and that vaccine did have some remnant from an abortion, and the particular disease that was out that we were trying to deal with was a 100% chance that you're going to die if you don't take the vaccine. Now the ethical question comes to fore, where you can ask yourself, would I take that? So if your wife is going to die and a vaccine has been created that has basically some vestiges of an abortion contained within it, could you permit that? And I think that really puts things into focus a little bit. So if it was me in that particular situation, I would say that my posture would be we should be contending for them to come up with a vaccine that would not have that. If there was no way that could be done, then I would probably lean on the side of, well, I'm not going to let my loved ones die just because that was wrong doesn't mean that I'm not going to leverage that. So, for example, if somebody stole food and the person that they stole the food from had died, and so there's no way to return the food. But you happen to have just the amount of food that this person who's about to die, if they don't get nutrition immediately, they're going to die as well. Well, do you not give them that food because that food was stolen? So in other words, just because we come into terms with something that can help somebody in a way that was inappropriate, is it always the case then that you can't take it? If you say, yes, that's always the case, well, then you have to permit that person to die when you could have helped it, and when helping, it's not you condoning the way that that came about. So that's the way that I would ethically think through that scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to make too, because I think that sometimes you could find people that become hostile toward those that have been vaccinated. And the assumption is because you were vaccinated, that means that you're just full-blown supportive of abortion. And no, they're not for abortion. And yet for them and for the safety of their family, they just felt like receiving that vaccination was the right path to go. But I think that what Bobby brought up is a really great point, is that at least in this scenario, there are options.
Yep.
That you could actually find out information about the different types of vaccinations and to say, you know what, I'm going to go with that one because morally, ethically, I feel more at peace, going down that path, knowing that there wasn't any remnants of an aborted child in this.
Yeah, and I think it was actually the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that's what
That's right, yeah.
The controversy was about. And there were sides that said, no, it's not true, and yes, it is true. So
what was it, the Pfizer and the Moderna.
It's Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J.
Johnson.
Those are the three. Yeah. But, and a really good point that you brought up about having to choose between a loved one and, and there's probably a lot of people who may have just heard you say that and said, I can't believe he just said that. But it's one of those things where, but if you're ever in that situation, all of a sudden you would be faced with having to make that decision.
Yeah, this is a situation where you get stuck in some pretty bad spots, right? I mean, think about Rahab. She tells a lie to save the spies. Does that mean she thought lying was okay? Well, I don't know, because given where she was at that time, she wasn't a believer, so maybe she didn't have the right worldview on truth-telling under difficult circumstances, and God just met her where she was at.
That's another good point. If somebody came to your home and said, bring your kids out here, we want to kidnap them, would you lie and say, they're not here, even though they are there? Would you be okay with lying? Or nope, I always tell the truth. Here's my kids.
So if you are in a particular ethical situation, some people would want to say, well, God would never put you in that kind of a circumstance. And I'm not sure that we can make that claim, because it would require that we are aware of every circumstance that a person could be put in order to make that claim. I also would think, about Corey Ten Boom and others who had difficult situations. So it's really easy for us from our comfort zone to talk in an ethical high posture about what we would do. But if somebody knocked on your door and they had a machete in their hand and they wanted to know where your family was, and you knew that you could tell a lie and say they're not here and they could leave because that's what they were doing at the previous houses that they went, they were leaving, or you could just hand your family over. Well, I'm really here's the thing. While we might make a big deal about that particular lie because we're thinking about it, we'll break the speed limit. We'll do other little things here and there. But when it comes time to really think about this gravity thing, then all of a sudden, we wouldn't do that.
We'll break the speed limit to get to church on time.
Yeah. I would have broke the speed limit yesterday to get to the radio station earlier if I could, but I was in traffic.
Yes.
No, the only thing I was just going to add is the Corrie ten Boom reference for those that aren't familiar with the story is that she and her family were hiding Jews during, the Nazi Holocaust. And so that was one of those decisions that they had to make as the Nazis were pounding on their door and they were saying, do you have any Jews in the house? And it wasn't just that family. It was just a bunch of Christian families that were seeking to hide Jews, wanting to save lives. And there were moments that they had to say, no Jews here.
Yep.
And so that reminds me of that story of the two midwives in the book of Exodus, where Pharaoh said, hey, we want you to take every male child and let us know so that we can, take them and kill them by throwing them into the Nile River. And they said, hey, every time we try to get to these women are really lively. They keep giving birth before we even get there. And in both cases with Rahab and these two women, and again, it's not God endorsing the lie, but he did bless those people.
Yeah, and you think about somebody like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, for example. Here he was in the midst of World War II, and he was a famed theologian, and he did not fall in line with the state church, and he was part of the Confessors, and he was somebody who was he took place in an assassination coup against Adolf Hitler, and the attempt failed as they set a bomb off that would have taken the life of Adolf Hitler, and as a result, he was hanged. So the ethical question is this: if there is a Christian and they're in a situation where they have access to a brutal dictator to take him out, are they able to do that? Now, that's an interesting thought. It does seem like the moral theory that was motivating Dietrich Bonhoeffer at that time would have been utilitarian. So there's different ethical theories that ethicists talk about. So utilitarianism is the ethical theory that you want to do what will produce the most amount of good for the most amount of people and the least amount of pain for the least amount of people. So in this particular situation, you could see how Bonhoeffer and those would have reasoned. We will create the most amount of good for the most amount of people by getting rid of this one person who's causing the most amount of pain for the most amount of people. That's not typically a good ethical theory for us as Christians. We would, that's an ethical theory put out by John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham. An ethical theory that we would fall more in line with would be something in line of virtue ethics, like Aristotelian virtue ethics. He wrote his Nicomachean Ethics, word virtue, arete, and basically in virtue ethics, we're trying to become a certain kind of virtuous person, and you combine that with another ethical theory known as deontological ethics, which is Kantian. And Immanuel Kant talked about deontology, which comes from the word, deontic, which is duty-based ethics. So a duty-based ethic is we always have the right to do the right duty, regardless of consideration of the consequences or the outcome. So if you're going by a duty-based ethic and you're Bonhoeffer, he has a duty to not kill, regardless of the horrific consequences. If you're Corrie ten Boom, you have a duty to not lie in that situation or not take this vaccine. I would say, as I think about these theories, that's by and large the way that we roll in that particular life. You just have a duty to do this. Now, let me even just, if I can just take a moment, let you see how these ethical theories take shape. In this war in the Ukraine, for example, you can see that you have three different ethical theories that have been taking place. You have Machiavellian ethics. Machiavelli wrote this slender little book called The Prince. And for him, his ethical theory was might makes right. And so you do whatever you can to preserve power. Well, that's Putin. He's going to preserve power. You can even tell lies if you want. You just got to hold on to your power. So Putin would be like, okay, yeah, we're not going to do something, and boom, he goes and blows something up. So here is this might makes right Machiavellian ethic. Then when it comes to the United Nations, they have a utilitarian ethic, which was, hey, let's not close up the airspace because we have to do what's going to be most beneficial for the most amount of people. And so they're trying to weigh things out, right? Like, and the fault in that is it presumes you know the future. Like you can actually do statistics like that. And then the deontological ethic, the duty-based ethic, is the Ukrainians who are saying, you have a right to close the sky up. You got to do this duty. And so here is three moral theories in clash with one another right before our very eyes. So how do we wrap all this up? Well, I think by and large, we have a duty-based deontological ethic with a goal to be virtuous with virtue ethics, and our virtue moral exemplar is Jesus, and utilitarianism is something that we should avoid, but there are weird situations that we can get in, like saying that our family's not here, where we can all understand that, hey, God, I would imagine, would be very forgiving if you saved your family's life at the expense of your life.
Right. And it's not like that would be the unforgivable sin, the unpardonable sin.
Yeah. So there's a mouthful, but hopefully that helps.
That was really good.
That was.
Yeah, but all that to say, vaccines are okay.
Okay. Christina, thanks for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective. Hope to hear from you again soon. 888-564-6173. Oh, yeah, don't forget we archive all of our programs on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify in case everything you just heard, you wish you had a pen and paper so that you can take notes. Well, you can. Just go watch the archive a little bit later today. All right, back to the phones. Let's go up to Canada. Talk to our friend Sophia. How you doing, Sophia?
Oh, hi, Brian Perez. How are you, darling?
Doing well, thank you.
And Dr. Bobby Conway, how are you?
Good, thank you, Sophia.
And John, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I just want to say yesterday program was spot on. It was excellent. I like the way all three of you dealt with the lady and her lover, the same female lover, the pastor and our lover. The way you guys did talk about it, it was very strengthening to see you stick to your gun, but have love at the same time.
That's right. And that program is also archived on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify, so anybody can check it out if they want to hear it again.
Yes, really good. Oh, I have a question, darling.
Okay.
I'm going to read it slowly because I am having a hard time understanding it myself.
No, I think we got it because you told it to our call screener, and the way it's written up here on the screen, if Judas had not betrayed Jesus, who would have betrayed him? Would there have been somebody else? Is that basically what you want to know?
Something like that.
Okay. Bobby, we'll start with you. What do you say?
Well, think about this, Sophia, as we consider that question. If Judas didn't betray Jesus, who would have? Because the Bible does prophesy that Jesus would be betrayed. That would require, number one, a knowledge that we don't have, because we wouldn't want to say, oh, well, if it wasn't Judas, it would have been Thomas. Like we wouldn't know that. That would require a knowledge of all counterfactuals, which would be considering different states of affairs and trying to come up with the best explanation, and we wouldn't have any way of knowing that. Not only that, nobody else would have done it because Judas was the one that Jesus knew who would do it. So that is exactly what happened, that God would have created Judas knowing that Judas was going to betray Jesus, and so that prophecy would come to fulfillment in the person of Judas. So it's not even something that we have to entertain who else would have done it had it not been Judas, because Judas did it, and it was even determined that he would be the one who would do it.
But doesn't that bring up the question of free will? People might say, oh, so Judas was forced to betray Jesus? He didn't have a choice in the matter?
No. Well, if you take like a Molinist perspective of God's knowledge, that God has what's known as middle knowledge, that he knows all counterfactuals. That is to say, he knows what we would do in any possible world or any possible set of circumstances, that he creates the best possible world, which is the actual world that we live in. And therefore, God would have created Judas, but he created him still with his freedom. But the fact that God would know that Judas would do what he would do doesn't limit Judas's freedom. It just means that God created the world knowing that Judas would do what he did and that he would do it freely.
It's like those choose your own adventure books. You guys remember those?
Yes, I do remember those.
Yeah,
yes.
So is it kind of like that where you get to the end of a certain page and then if you want to turn left, turn to this page. If you want to turn right, go to that page. Remember those? Is it something like that or am I off?
Well, Judas was definitely responsible for his actions. You know, he did not die and then stand before the Lord and say, "Hey, welcome, buddy," because everything that you did, you're not responsible for. No, he was responsible for his actions. When Peter in Acts chapter 1 was speaking to the disciples in recognizing that they needed to choose his replacement, Peter was very clear about Judas's actions, that he was responsible. And yet, like Bobby said, God knew in advance that the Messiah would be betrayed into the hands of those that would kill him. And so we have those Old Testament prophecies, even up to the amount of silver that Jesus would be betrayed for.
Yeah, good point.
Right? And so all of those things doesn't excuse Judas, but what we do know from Scripture is that in God's plan, the way that Jesus was going to be handed into the hands of his enemies, and even when Jesus was giving the preview of upcoming attractions, right, to his disciples, he talked about how he would be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. Like all of that stuff was already understood, and Judas, he's the one that followed through with just the sin that was in his heart. John's gospel says that Satan entered his heart, and Judas, he gave into that, So.
Yeah, and so when you even think about these types of situations, it's the fact that God knows all of our decisions as well. So it's not like, hey, God created Judas knowing what Judas would do. God created all three of us knowing what we would do as well. With free will, I would assume that this is the best possible world that God created, where there would be the most amount of good and the least amount of evil. That is to say that if God would have created another world, then we can't assume that other world would have had more good and less evil. It could be just given the nature of true freedom and free will that this is the best possible world with the least amount of evil and the most amount of good, because if we're truly to be free, there is going to be no possible world that God would create whereby we would freely always do the good. And so we happen to be in this world that we find ourselves in, and we still see a lot of evil, but I give the benefit of the doubt that he created us in the best possible of circumstances.
Yeah.
Sophia, thanks for your phone call. Let's try to sneak in one more before the break. Betty in California, what did you want to know?
Hello.
Hi, what's your question?
Hi, Pastor. Thank you for taking my call. My question is, what does the Bible say on cremation? And second part to that is, what, if that's okay, what do you do with the ashes? What's the protocol for ashes after?
Okay, John, we'll start with you.
Well, the closest thing that we could talk about with cremation is in the Genesis story. You remember God told Adam that when they die, you came from dust, you're going to return to dust. And what cremation does is it speeds up that process. And there are some people that have a difficulty with cremation because, looking back in church history, there was a preference for burial because they were looking at that as the hope of the resurrection. But when it came to cremation, the thing is that whether you're buried or cremated, we're still going to return to the dust. And do we have time to talk more about this after the break?
Of course we do.
Then.
We will. So hang on, everybody. 888-564-6173 is our telephone number. We're talking about cremation with Betty, who called in from California. Lots of other great calls on the board as well. We will get to as many as we can before 4 p.m. Pacific time. And you can call us with your question as well. The phone number is there on the bottom of your screen if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. But since most of you are listening on the radio, I have to tell you the phone number. It's 888-564-6173. the second half of Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Brian Perez here, along with Bobby Conway from the 1 Minute Apologist channel on YouTube. He's here in the studio live with us this week. No Bobby cam to worry about, no freezing going on, none of that. Bobby is here today and tomorrow. We're so happy to see him here.
Happy.
John Hwang
so
is
happy.
John Hwang's always happy, especially when he sees Bobby Conway. John is one of the assistant pastors at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. He's sitting in for Brian Broderson today. And speaking of Calvary Costa Mesa, tonight is part one of the two-part Wednesday night series that Sammy Tanago is doing on how to reach Muslims for Christ, how to share the gospel with our Muslim friends and neighbors. That's tonight at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Starts at 7 p.m. Pacific time. You can find out more at cccm.com. Now, right before the break, we were talking about cremation. Betty from California called in with her question. John, the music started. You couldn't, well, I think you had finished your thought on cremation, but the second half of Betty's question was, what should we do with the ashes? Is there some kind of protocol?
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, to what I was saying in the beginning that, just because a family decides to cremate a loved one doesn't mean that they don't have a hope in the resurrection. Like I said, there was a preference where in burial there was a way that Christians could testify to the fact that that person isn't going to remain dead forever. That person is going to be raised, and in cremation, you can still hold on to that. And I think we should also keep in mind that in some places, because of lack of land, in some countries, cremation is just the way for what you do with people that have died. I know that I've shared the story of when I was a missionary in Brazil, that there are parts of Brazil where it's so heavily populated that finding places to bury people is really difficult. And so they started building sky rises, and each floor was a burial plot, and then for others, cremation is, just because of finances, it's something that is something that they have to do. And so, all that to say that there's nothing I found in Scripture that would speak against the process of cremation. And so, if that's something that you're thinking of, just make sure that you have a conversation with family and loved ones and all that about that. In regards to protocol for ashes, again, there is no clear mandate for Scripture on that, and so I know that some people have talked about that they want to spread their ashes, in the ocean. And isn't it interesting that in the book of Revelation it says, "And the sea gave up their dead." So you sometimes wonder if that has something to do with it. Yeah. And but others have, I have a friend that said he wants part of his ashes, buried in the UK, another part off the coast of Hawaii, and another part in some other place, like 3 places that were meaningful to him.
Yeah.
And but I don't think
someone's got to do a lot of traveling.
Yeah,
might as well just go ahead and bury them.
But I don't think that that's something that you need to worry about, that the Lord's going to be upset on that.
All right, Betty, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. Now we're going to go to Colorado. Julie, what is your question for us today?
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for taking my call. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. We are a small church, and we had several years ago 2 women, a couple, who came to our pastor. One of the women's fathers was a deacon in a Baptist church, and he would not allow them to attend that church. So they came to our pastor, said, "We don't want to cause trouble. We don't want to be demonstrative in front of people. We don't want to upset anyone. We just want to worship God, and we'd love to do it here with you." He took that before the board. The board thought that it was okay for them to come and worship with us, that everybody's welcome to worship at our church. So time passed. They had a baby. The baby was dedicated at the church, and then they moved away for a few years. Now they've moved back, and things have changed. They want to be more active in the church. One of them wants to begin a Stevens ministry. The other one wants to participate in the worship team. And so now there's some division in the church about whether we're open to allowing everyone in or whether we affirm that lifestyle and allow them to be in obvious or leadership positions. And we're having trouble defining, number one, biblically where we should stand on this, and number two, how to deal with it.
Right. Wow. It's one of those things we didn't think we'd be talking about, but we are. Bobby, what would you say to Julie?
Well, I think it's great that they're, being open to having them come, as all churches should be. But a line is crossed once we say that you can serve on the worship team. Are we going to be consistent, as church leaders in a particular situation like this? If the Bible talks about homosexuality as a sin, well, if you've got a boyfriend and a girlfriend and they're sleeping together and you're aware of that, are you going to let them serve on the worship team? If you know that somebody is a drug addict or an alcoholic and they're totally walking outside of the will of God, are you going to let them serve on the worship team? This is where we get ourselves in trouble, and we become like Eli as a leader. Eli in the Old Testament had two rebellious sons, and they did not honor the covenant of God. They were sleeping with women outside the temple. I mean, they were debauched. And as a result, Eli didn't hold them accountable, but God did. Mm-hmm. And I think that ultimately we have to remember, just because people are friendly and because they're nice, well, all of a sudden, take the dedication. Well, a dedication of a baby is typically more about the parents than it is about the baby. It's us praying that God would give the parents wisdom as they raise their child. So how they would have went about doing that without affirming their union would be interesting. I think you could for sure say, I'll say a blessing for the child. I'm not going to hold anything against the child on this, but I can't validate this same-sex relationship. So this same-sex couple, they're living together, they're obviously being intimate together. You could look at it, what would you do in a situation if you had a boyfriend and girlfriend, they were just sleeping together, just violating the scriptures? You're going to stick them up on worship, or are you going to help them to grow? Well, the purpose of leaders is to help people to grow, to become more like Christ. And if people aren't open to that, even if they're friendly and they're really nice and they're really sweet, we can't allow friendliness to blind us from the fact that there's still sin. The Bible tells us about false teachers. They'll show up in sheep's clothing, right? They're going to look innocent. They're going to seem friendly in our midst. They're going to seem innocent. And it's going to take real discernment and real leadership to deal with that. So I would say if they start moving in a direction of putting these leaders in place, the church is obviously moving in a direction that is concerning. And I would, with some other people in the church, go to the leaders and find out what their stance is. And if they are planning to address it, great. If they're not planning to address it, then I would say that you and others are going to have to figure out what you're going to do. If this couple adamantly wants to serve and worship, there's churches out there that are completely gay affirming. And so I would also be extra cautious, because I could see how the enemy could use this as an evangelistic strategy, so to speak. Let's send a really nice, friendly homosexual couple into a church for the sole purpose of just befriending people, breaking down that culture, and ultimately being embraced into it fully in leadership and all.
I think Julie did say that this has caused a split in her church.
Yeah.
So it's already crazy. Anything to add, John?
No, I was just going to say that's a very sound biblical counsel, Bobby. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Tom.
And I appreciate the clarity that you said that with. And because right now I think a lot of churches do feel a bit, nervous about, making stands like that, because they just don't want to be labeled as being intolerant or unloving or different things. But the thing is like I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about Paul's word to Titus, and we know that the letters of Timothy and Titus are pastoral letters, and there he charges Titus to instruct the congregation in a way that what they believe theologically, doctrinally needs to be seen in their practice, in their behavior, because the way that we behave in church, we adorn the doctrine of God. And what kind of message does, and I'm glad that you brought up, it's not just about the homosexuality, but about sexual immorality, about the heterosexual sexual immorality and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Like how is that adorning the doctrine of God when on one hand we seem to endorse one lifestyle by putting them into positions of authority and power, and at the same time wanting to communicate to the world, here is the distinctive marks of the gospel. And I think that your response was just so good, Bobby, so I'm glad you said it.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I think that our message as pastors should be something like this. Hey, we are so glad that you are here. We welcome you here. Give everybody a hug on Sunday. Do everything you can to take them out to lunch, to befriend them, but let them know, look, I'm aware that you are in a same-sex marriage here or a same-sex relationship, and we welcome you coming. But our welcome to you and coming is, my motivation is to put the Word of God before you, and I am going to teach it in an uncompromising way. And I hope you understand that I can't compromise my convictions at the expense of your relationship. I'm in relationship to God, and I'm going to deliver the truth. And I trust that you'll feel that I'm coming across loving. But my motivation in teaching is to bring not only you, but all of us, myself included, where there's sin in our life, to become more like Jesus.
No, that's really good.
Julie, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173. Bobby Conway and John Hwang answering your questions. Jared hung up. Okay, so let's go to Virginia, talk to Arizona. No, I'm sorry. Let's go to Arizona, talk to Virginia. What did you want to know, Virginia?
Yes, I wanted to know, where do we get this modern culture view of hell if it's not described in Hebrew and Greek view?
Bobby, what do you say?
The idea of hell, when you think about this, we're not trying to adopt a Greek view of kind of what happens in the afterlife. So, for example, if you were to take Plato or Aristotle, you're going to have Greek philosophers who believe in the soul, but they're not talking about the idea of hell, and nor are we to gain our understanding of the afterlife from them. What we're looking at is Hebrew culture, and when it comes to Hebrew, that's a bigger question. So the Greek view is irrelevant. The Hebrew question is relevant, but what do we understand as it relates to the Hebrew Jews? Well, in the Old Testament, we can see that when somebody dies, that their body goes into the ground, but their soul lives on, because our soul will live forever. And we also know that they're sort of in this holding place, so to speak. There is a Greek word that is used for Hades in the Old Testament, Sheol in Hebrew, for the place of the dead. But you have in the Old Testament, believers go into one compartment, and unbelievers would kind of go into another compartment. That is their soulish state, and that soulish state for believers would obviously be a heaven-like state, but the experience for unbelievers would not be as such, but it's certainly not anything like the eternal lake of fire that's going to come about in the end. So what's happening is think about the idea of progressive revelation. There's a lot that we learn through progressive revelation. That is to say that God is revealing himself and his plans through the course of time. And so with the emergence of the New Testament, our understanding of the afterlife and its future crystallizes for us through the person of Jesus Christ, who helps us to understand more fully the final outcome of those who are separated from him. In fact, it is Jesus then, though he spoke in Aramaic, most likely, they wrote in Greek, but it's not the Greek view that we're looking to. It's the Hebrew view of Jesus, who spoke in Aramaic, and he believed in hell, taught us about hell, and then it was put in Greek writing because Greek was the koine, the common language of the people of the day.
What do you think, Virginia?
Okay, that last part on Aramaic that Jesus spoke makes a lot of sense now, the way you explained that last part of it. So I'm
Great.
just, okay, so where can I find more about this? Is there a book that, I can purchase to help me with this?
Well, you could read books that are on the topic of hell, and books that are on the topic of hell will address what this is like. And so that's what you would want to do, is dig into the topic of hell, or you could go to commentaries in the New Testament that have passages that talk about hell, and you could look up what some commentaries would say. That's what I would suggest for that. I mean, I talk about it. I wrote a book called Hell, Rob Bell, and What Happens When People Die. It was a response to Rob Bell's book, Love Wins. But I wouldn't say it's necessary to read that little book. It's dated because Love Wins is kind of not talked about anymore. But what you would find helpful is the books and the resources that I interact with in this little book to give you some more places to go.
And that book title again is?
Hell, Rob Bell, and What Happens When People Die.
And that's available at oneminuteapologist.com?
Actually, Amazon.
Amazon,
yeah.
Okay. All right, so check that out, Virginia, I'm sorry. And another good source of information might be the Chapel Store of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. It's our little bookstore right over there around the corner from here. And you might be able to call them and see if they can suggest any resources. Their phone number is 714-540-2941, 714-540-2941. And starting next week, they're going to be open Monday through Friday, so that's cool. John, any resources you can think of, or any other thoughts?
No, I mean, the only thought that I had was a question. I'm just curious what motivated that question, just because I know that there are people that say that hell is a modern concept, a modern invention of people. And so I'm just wondering if there might be some that are listening out there saying, gosh, you know what, I just don't even buy into the whole idea that there is a hell. And this is really just Dante's Inferno, that we've adopted in the Western world and to our culture. And that's why I thought about your response to Rob Bell. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I know that there are people that may be pushing and advocating for that doctrine.
Yeah, good point.
Yes, that's exactly what's going on with the new believer. So I was curious about it, so I wanted to... I did look up the Unger's dictionary, and it did take me to the Hebrew and what the English, the word hell is more in the.
And you're going to see the word Gehenna.
Oh yes, Gehenna. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for calling today on Pastor's Perspective, 888-564-6173. And yeah, look at that. Bobby's book is available for Kindle. It's called Hell, Rob Bell, and What Happens When People Die.
Ultimately, this question of hell for us, it's a hard concept, and what John says is exactly right. I mean, Dante's Inferno, I've read that, and it uses graphic descriptions of writhing and all that, like Jesus did. But as a Christian, we don't have to see hell as actual flames to believe that it's a literal place. You can see it as metaphorical language. The Bible says that the tongue is a fire in James 3. Are we to believe that our tongue is an actual fire, or is it destructive? Well, hell is a place where people experience eternal destruction. So if one's soul lives without God because they didn't believe in him, so how do we then begin to swallow this idea of hell? Well, we can think about principles like, will not the judge of the earth do what is right? He's not willing that any should perish. That he's good, that Jesus took our hell for us on a cross, so to speak, if we believe in him. But there are some people that don't want anything to do with God. Not only that, when you go to the book of Revelation, you see that people are actually praising God for his justice. And the reason we struggle with hell is we don't understand God's justice. Now, interestingly enough, we have our own justice system, and we recognize the need for justice. Like we have judges that hold people accountable. I think our problem with hell, for some people, it will seem like the punishment doesn't seem to fit the crime, though. Like an eternal hell for a temporal life. And William Lane Craig, the great Christian philosopher, I like the way that he talks about that. The reason that a person is eternally separated from God in hell forever is because the sinning goes on forever. So it's not like when somebody dies, they're finished with their sin. No, their sin is just getting started, and it will be even worse. And what will happen in hell is people will then realize that even the goodness that came out of them during their earthly experience was a result of God's general grace in their life. Wow. So the fact that people can experience some peace and love and some sacrificial giving and all that kind of stuff, the fact that people can forgive, it's because God's moral law is written in their heart and they're able to do good. But in hell, the absence of God's moral law will not be on their heart anymore, so to speak, because they won't be able to operate God's moral law. They'll be left to themselves. Imagine what we would be without God's general grace. All of our emotions, take the worst of all of our emotions and put them in full throttle. Being separated from God's general grace. That's what it is. What's heaven? Imagine if we were able to perfectly live out God's will and never sin. That's heaven. Perfect emotions, being in a perfect relationship with him, connected to him. And so hopefully that can help make a little bit of sense. God is just, and we have to trust that ultimately when we're struggling with hell, I think we're really struggling with the question, is God just? But if we believe that God is just and good, then that can help us to trust him. And one of the things that we're up against is we have so many caricatures that we have to try to filter out of our brain that we see when we think about hell that makes it hard for us to digest it.
Wow.
And again, we say wow.
Good. Man, be my teacher.
Oh, geez.
Be my rabbi.
The John Cube is in effect.
I think we got to check the batteries on that.
Man, that was so good, Bobby. And man, that whole thing that you brought up that William Lane Craig said, man, that is just like my mind is just blown by that statement.
Yeah, the reason that hell goes on forever is because the sinning goes on forever. In fact, the sinning gets worse.
Yeah.
We don't have God's general grace.
Wow.
I never thought of it that way, that the sinning gets worse. You would think it'd be all gone, but
there's nothing to protect us from it any longer. God's removed that.
But we don't have the ability to sin. I mean, we don't have the ability to fornicate, etc. So,
well, we have the ability to do what's worse, and that's to be left in our pride. We have the ability to hate. But who knows what all kinds of sins that could be committed in hell. We will, I will say we, I'm including myself in that. I'd like to,
please don't.
I'd like to not. Just as there'll be glorified bodies for, lack of not trying to sound too clever, there'll be horrified bodies. I mean, there will be this body that people will have. So when we say that there won't be fornication, it's hard to imagine that, but if there is, it wouldn't be pleasure. It would just be complete emptiness. And you're not going to find pleasure in the things that you do on earth.
Wow. Was that a book that William Lane Craig wrote? Do you remember which book it was?
No, it wasn't.
A talk.
It wasn't a book. It was just a talk.
Okay.
By the way, I would encourage our listeners to familiarize themselves. Sometimes people might go, "Hey, who's a big influence in your life, Bobby?" Nobody has influenced my thinking more than William Lane Craig. I've listened to so much of his stuff. He's got a website, reasonablefaith.org, and every week I listen to his podcast. He's got two of them. One's called the Reasonable Faith Podcast, and the other one's called the Defenders Podcast, where you get William Lane Craig. He's the greatest debater of our time and one of the most premier theologians and philosophers. When I first started listening to him many years ago, he was hard for me to digest because he's so profoundly deep. But I just wanted so much to get my hands around what he was saying. Yep. And now I double speed. I mean, in fact, I went to see my friend at the beach last week, and I listened to 16, it was a 4-hour drive there and a 4-hour drive back, and I listened to 16 weeks of his school in double speed. Wow. I just eat this stuff up, and I think I have a lot of gratitude to William Lane Craig and his work, and I would say that anybody who wants to listen to him, it's a Sunday school class that he teaches called his Defenders podcast.
So this is definitely meat, not milk.
You're not going to look. I've been to seminary. I've never had. You'll get greater theology than I experienced at Dallas Theological Seminary. I mean, it is and what I love about him is he's a philosopher, so he gives you a philosophical theology. Yeah. So he really brings that to bear, and I think it'll help people improve in their theological discernment.
I'm sold.
Find William Lane Craig at reasonablefaith.org. Sorry that we couldn't get to all your calls. Call us tomorrow. We will be here for 2 hours on Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.